This is the regular City Council meeting for August 30th, 2022. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez not yet present. Councilmember Friedman?
Here.
Councilmember Sneddon?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon?
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez?
Present.
Councilmember Jordan? Here. And Mayor Russ.
Here. All right, very good. We did hold a closed session today, and I'm going to report out the results of the closed session as we appointed our new police chief. Madam,
Madam, Mr. Mayor, would you please announce the results of that, the vote tally?
okay, I will do that. The vote tally was unanimous for all members present. Absent in the vote tally was Alejandro Gutierrez, but it was unanimous in favor of our new appointed police chief.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I'm very pleased to announce that council did support my recommendation to appoint Kelly Gordon as our next police chief. Ms. Gordon brings extensive experience in a number of areas. She's got 26 years in policing, most recently, and I'm totally blanking. So I will invite Ms. Gordon up to the podium to introduce herself and just make some very brief remarks. Thank you.
Ms. Gordon, if you would, please.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor, City Council members. It is my honor and privilege to be here this afternoon. I'm going to keep my comments very brief. I look forward to serving the Santa Barbara community, being part of this amazing team of policing professionals. I will tell you, based on what I've seen, it's a fantastic department, and I'm looking forward to being part of that department. Incredible executive team. Everyone that I've met has been fantastic. I look forward to working with them. My first priority is to get to know my people, clearly, in my police department, and our community, residents and businesses. I look forward to working with the Police and Fire Commission as we move forward with the new expanded oversight and transparency. I think that's very important. Together, we'll work hard to continue to strengthen our collaborative relationships, achieve common goals, and remain dedicated to keeping our community safe. So thank you for your time. I look forward to working with each of you, getting to know each of you, as well as our community and our police department. And it's an honor and privilege to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, very good. I believe we have a ceremonial item, as I recall. Madam Clerk, do we have a ceremonial item?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, a certificate recognizing SB Foresters as NBC World Series Champions 2022.
Every once in a while, we get to do something fun here, City Council. And this is particularly great because our new, and was it fifth time manager of the year for the league? Is that what it was this time?
For the NBC?
Well, yeah, well, no, this is that, I didn't get all the facts, just some of the facts. Anyway, we're very proud for our very own Santa Barbara Foresters who represent this city very well. The certificate of recognition presented to the Santa Barbara Foresters, the 2022 National Baseball Congress World Champions. Whereas Santa Barbara proudly enjoys Santa Barbara Foresters as their namesake baseball team, and whereas the Foresters have recently won their third straight National Baseball Congress World Series title by defeating the Kansas Haylarks by a score of 12-1, and whereas the Foresters are only the third team to accomplish a three-peat in the 88-year history of the NBC World Series, and whereas the Foresters skipper, Bill Pintard, in his 27th year of managing the Foresters, has won all 10 of the Foresters championships and brought the team to the title game 12 times, And whereas Bill Pintard also functions as a scout for the New York Yankees, Major League Baseball organization, is the son-in-law of our very own Bill Burkus, famous in Santa Barbara as sports as a Laker coaching legend, thus perpetuating the winning tradition of this family. Whereas the Foresters baseball team, under the moniker Hugs for Cubs, performs valuable and compassionate charitable work for young cancer patients and their families. Now, therefore, I, Randy Rouse, by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Santa Barbara, do hereby proudly welcome home the Foresters, the NBC World Champions, once again, and invite the Santa Barbara community and join me in a heartfelt congratulations. Skipper?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't usually get emotional, but that was emotional for me because I am so proud to be a Santa Barbarian. I am so proud to have lived in this area for over 50 years. And you mentioned my father-in-law, Bill Burka, who has been here. He was a city rec manager for many years before he went on to Laker and NBA stardom. People ask me, well, when are you going to retire, Bill? I have to wait till my father-in-law, who's 95, retires before I retire. But it's a wonderful honor to get this proclamation and be able to come here and present Santa Barbara, our city council, with this trophy. I'm going to leave this trophy. You put it in council chambers for a while, and then on September 18th at the Carriage Museum, they're going to have a little celebration down there at 2 o'clock, and we'd love to see you all there. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the cooperation that I've gotten from City Parks and Recreation, from the maintenance, the grounds landscaping group, Santa Barbara City College, the fire department, the police department. Is she still here? We have an ex-forester on her police department as a detective, a young man that played for us. And the collaborative work amongst all those committees with Santa Barbara City College has enabled us to be able to play down there at Pershing Park because we didn't have a home. We were at UCSB. They closed that out. And Pershing is our home. And we hope by us being there, we've enhanced a little bit of the vibration down there at Pershing, eliminated some problems, and hope we didn't cause any other ones. But we are so proud to have Santa Barbara on our chest when we go back to Wichita, Kansas. And Wichita is very familiar with the name Santa Barbara. And so I thank you very much. I'm proud to be a member of this community, and thank you all. I appreciate it. Can I leave this here, or do you want me to?
Yeah, Ms. Gorman will figure out what to do with it, won't you, Ms. Gorman? Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll get our trophy case. Thank you very much. And for any of you that have not been to a Foresters game, whether or not you like baseball, it's one of the neatest scenes, great community thing, lots of kids, really fun, one of the most kind of all-American things you can do. So I suggest next season, try it out. It's really fun. Okay, now back to business, I suppose. Let's see, where are we at here? Okay, Madam Administrator, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes, Mayor Rouse.
Okay, we'll go then to public comment, and that's for 3 minutes at the dais for any subject that is within the purview of this body but not on our regular scheduled agenda. I have Stephen, and I believe the last name is Hoot. All right, and 3 minutes at the podium, please.
Thank you guys for having me. I want to apologize for the way I'm dressed. Unfortunately, I came directly from work. So, that being said, what I do for work is plumbing. So I became a plumber because I'm passionate about the water mainly, and I'm a local Santa Barbarian, I guess. Also, I love to hear about our locals being successful. But I'm from LA, where it's a huge city, and you can't really make a difference in your community. So I just feel empowered to come here and speak to all of you. I don't know if it's the right place, but I'm still happy to speak my mind. And like I said, I'm very passionate about what I do, plumbing, and I work a lot in Santa Barbara, Montecito, and I think water is a very important issue. And in a place like Santa Barbara, we have the power to, take it into our own hands and do something about it. And for example, I put in a lot of water softeners in these wealthy homes and a lot of reverse osmosis water systems, and I see a lot of, issues that are going on with the construction. And like I said, I'm very young and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I just am very passionate about plumbing and water and having, an independent Santa Barbara. And for example, when I first moved here, we had all the mudslides in Montecito, and we lost a lot of lives, and wildfires like the Thomas Fire ripped through Santa Barbara when I was here. And I think if we kind of take control of our water, then we can deal with these problems a lot better. And like I said, firsthand through my work, I also have experience with ecosystem restoration and dealing with some of the leading hydrologists in the country who study the way water flows. And it's really hard that we have these steep mountains directly flowing into the ocean. And I just wanted to bring it up because like I said, I'm very passionate, and I hope that in the future, whether it's 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I don't plan on ever moving away from Santa Barbara. But I hope that this can be an issue that we focus on, especially now that drought is becoming even more of a problem in California. And I'm worried that a lot of the bigger cities like LA or other places will try to take our water, and we have such a small, tight-knit community here in Santa Barbara. I love the people. I love the little guy. I always root for the little guy, and I hope that, Santa Barbara can kind of just do the best that we can and protect our citizens from mudslides, from wildfires, have better ecosystems, and also have less waste, like I said, on the construction sites when it comes to installing a lot of these systems that I put in on a daily basis. I know the money, can buy these types of things, but I think it's also important for us to look at other things that are more important just than the money, So anyway, my time's up, but thank you for letting me speak. I feel honored, and thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, is anybody online for general public comment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one speaker for general public comment, Natasha Torodovic. Natasha Torodovic, please go ahead.
I'm feeling frustrated. As they say, if you keep paying to solve a problem and it grows, stop feeding the beast. The city has been paying for Santa Barbara ACT to run the RAP meetings, which took place on a weekly basis, replacing the MATAF meetings. And that was part of the PATH CUP. And once a month, PATH was supposed to respond to community concerns. And these weekly meetings have been cut to twice a month. On Friday, 45 minutes of the RAP call was consumed with a poorly done YouTube PowerPoint presentation, which could have been sent out in advance. It was designed to school us, poor, ignorant savages, in the harm reduction. But what they wanted to do was to consume the hour. It's important to note that the CUP is for a homeless shelter. PATH, a state-funded agency, has changed their purview. Their state funding choice mandates this harm reduction policy, which sounds good, right? Virtuous even. And here's what that means. People are allowed to drink, shoot up, use drugs, and deal in and around PATH. PATH has become a quasi-rehab center, not part of their CUP, guys. So Friday's video was designed to force us to toe the party line. PATH is at the epicenter with externalities rippling through our streets and neighborhoods. And on Friday, I asked, what is the difference between enabling self-destructive behavior versus harm reduction? And harm reduction for whom? When hundreds of people, businesses, kids, families, vulnerable populations are impacted by nuisance and criminal behaviors, this is harm amplification and externalization. Our city is absorbing their scope creep. The compassionate are shamed if they don't nod and cheer. Any thoughtful group must ask, is the way we're doing this having negative consequences? Not with virtue signaling, and it's become worse than ever. Everything we've been doing, hundreds of hours wasted in pointless meetings since 2012, the sit-lie ordinance, repeated cleanups, talking ad nauseum, the alcohol ordinance. I'm frustrated because they refuse to be accountable for the costs and consequences to our community. Virtue signaling isn't difference making. Enough. We want an accountable shelter that's also a good neighbor, or they need to go.
All right, thank you. Are there further comments on, online, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, there are not further comments online. I do see that a person is there on the phone, and I just want to note for this person, if they wish to speak now or for a future item, to raise their hand. And if you're on the phone, you're going to raise your hand by pressing *9, *9. That information is on the front page of the agenda as well. No other speakers, Mr. Mayor.
All right, very good. We'll move on to the consent calendar, which has some items to read.
Item 3, approving the 2022-2024 management and professional attorneys' salary plans ordinance introduction. Recommendation the council introduce and subsequently adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the council of the city of Santa Barbara adopting the 2022-2024 salary plan applicable to unrepresented managers and professional attorneys, and the 2022-2024 salary plan applicable to certain unrepresented safety managers. Item 4, records destruction for finance department resolution. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara relating to the destruction of records held by the finance department in the accounting, administration, general services, risk management, and treasury divisions. Item 5, accepting a grant award for the support of the Library on the Go vehicle resolution. Recommendation the council A, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 22059, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2023 for $10,000. And B, accept the Anita L. Stafford Charitable Lead Trust Grant. 6, amendment to position salary control resolution 22064 with updates to classification and compensation for certain positions resolution. Recommendation the council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara amending resolution number 22064, the position salary control resolution for fiscal year 2023 to amend the established salary and titles for position and effective dates as listed. And finally, item 7, amendment to Santa Barbara City Agreement number 26997, Opticos Design, Inc., and the amount of $19,745 to expand the scope of objective design standards to include R2 zone properties, resolution contract. Recommendation of the council A, authorize the community development director to execute a first amendment to increase the amount of city agreement number 26997 with Opticos Design, Inc. in the amount of $19,745 to provide objective design standards for certain housing projects on R2 zone properties and to provide formatting consistent with SBMC Title 30. And B, adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara amending resolution 22-059, adopting the budget for fiscal year 2023 for $19,745.
Thank you. Does anyone on council need to pull any item for discussion? Are there any public comments on consent?
No, Mr. Mayor, no raised hands.
Okay, then I'll entertain a motion.
Move the consent calendar.
Moved by
Second.
Jordan.
Second.
Second by Harmon. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, this is a motion for the entirety of the consent calendar, a motion by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Harmon. Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez, not present. Councilmember Friedman?
Yes.
Councilmember Sneddon?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Harmon?
Yes.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez?
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan?
Yes.
Mayor Rouse?
Aye.
Very good.
All right, very good. That concludes the consent calendar. Can we get a report from the ordinance committee, please?
Yes, Mayor Rouse, thank you. Today we heard updates to the ordinance committee process, and that will be coming back to ordinance for just final approval, and then we approved an ordinance establishing a standing finance committee, and both of those will come together back to council after we've seen it again at ordinance.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the administrative and attorney reports. May we have the next item read, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that is item 12, Airport Department Status Update.
All right, very good. Mr. Moore, I have a number of public speaker comments, which I'll accept for this item for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll be closing out public comment on the airport discussion. So, Mr. DeMore, if you would, please.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Rouse. Good afternoon, members of the City Council. My name is Brian DeMore, Interim Airport Director for the City of Santa Barbara. Today's item is informational only. The reason we're coming forward today, though, with this item is because we have had a number of kind of individual items that have gone to council throughout this calendar year. Many of those items were on consent. Some did go on admin, but we're hearing just from members of the community questions about kind of what's the overall plan. And that's sort of what the purpose today is, just to give a broad overview of airport management and capital programming, as well as a look at some of our other issues. So next slide here just shows brief outline that I have in mind for today. It's probably 20, 25-minute presentation, and then we'll have public comment. But looking at history, it's important, I think, to think about where we're headed if we look back at the past, and then look at some of the regulatory requirements associated with running an airport, and then look at how we are structured organizationally in order to fulfill the regulatory requirements. And then a little bit more closer to present time, a little more hands-on, is the pandemic recovery and looking at the fiscal health of our department. And then a look at the capital improvement program, the wide variety of projects that we have going on, and highlighting a select few of those. We'll finish it up looking at our community noise advisory program, and then highlight some opportunities for the public to be involved moving forward. So aviation history here at Santa Barbara Airport. Our community has a very rich aviation history, which I wish I had known more about before I came to the airport, and it's been really fun to learn about that. It wasn't long after the Wright brothers' first flight back in December, I want to make sure I get it right, December 17, 1903. It wasn't long after that that we started to see aviation activities taking place here on the South Coast. By 1916, the Lockheed brothers, who are pictured here, they built the seaplane factory right off of State Street, and they had this wooden ramp to launch their planes out onto the water. One of their first employees, we heard earlier today about Santa Barbara natives, was a Santa Barbara native, Jack Northrop. So the names Lockheed and Northrop are probably familiar to a lot of folks. Over 100 years later, those are still names that are involved in the industry, with company names that have lived on for many years. Around 1920, the first airfield was constructed. This was known as the Casa Loma Airfield, and it was located where today would be the Muni Golf Course. It was established by Earl Ovington, who was known as the first airmail pilot, and definitely the most famous of the airmail pilots from that era. The Casa Loma was the first airfield, as I mentioned, and it was the only government-listed airstrip for a number of years. But later on, in 1928, Gordon Sackett and Roy Stetson, they landed an airplane out off the corner of Fairview and Hollister in a cow pasture. And they later developed a runway in that area with hopes of operating a flying school. So this area started to become more of the hub for aviation activity, and in the early 1930s, that original airfield, Casa Loma, was closed due to safety and noise concerns from the community, and soon after, this area became more developed. It was Frederick Stearns, another name that should be familiar in Santa Barbara history, helped with the development, and these two hangars that are pictured here, which are still standing on the property, were built along with a terminal facility or an admin type building in the middle, and some additional runways. General Western came to the site. They relocated from Burbank. They didn't operate for too long before they hit some financial troubles, but that's a name that you can see it's on these hangars, and it's a name that's often talked about. We still refer to those hangars as the General Western Aero hangars, and you'll hear a little bit more about those when we get into our capital update. Commercial air service was established in the 1930s, and on October 1st, 1936 was when United began service here in Santa Barbara, and that began what has been a long-standing partnership with United Airlines. As World War II approached, the United States government wanted to deploy a program where they could have more airports throughout the country. Their goal was to build 250 new airports, and local man Thomas Stork worked to secure Santa Barbara's enrollment in that program. And by 1941, groundbreaking was underway on what would become the Santa Barbara Municipal Airport. However, that didn't last long because World War II did in fact result in the United States getting involved, and that municipal airport quickly became the Marine Corps Air Station Santa Barbara, which was operated by the military, used for flight training purposes. They did a lot of development. A lot of our structures that are out there today were built during that World War II era. Following the war, though, the facility was turned back over to the city of Santa Barbara, and we have assumed operational control ever since. Additions were made to this original terminal building in 1967 and 1976, and we continued to operate out of that building until the new terminal was constructed and we moved in 2011. This is known as the John Rickard Terminal. The old terminal is known as the Ovington Terminal, the name that you heard earlier. And that the historic terminal was relocated on site, so we've preserved a lot of that history with this important project. So looking at regulations, what is our charge as a local airport owner versus what do some of the oversight agencies, what are their roles and responsibilities? And the key players are really the FAA and the TSA. The FAA, if you want to keep it really simple, they deal with safety, and the TSA deals with security. If you want to get into a little bit more detail on that, with the FAA, they operate the air traffic control system nationwide. They regulate the airspace. They give instructions to pilots as they're moving around the airspace. But they also are involved with capital planning, the disbursement of grant funds to what are called airport sponsors. I listed as airport owner here. And they're also very involved in regulations, standards, policies, all those types of things which we fall under in order to operate this airport. The TSA, as I mentioned, they deal with aviation security, so people are familiar with them as they run the checkpoints. They run the equipment that's inside those checkpoints, and they staff those checkpoints. They also have a lot of their own rules and regulations that the airport authority must follow. As the airport owner, our charge is basically to maintain the infrastructure. And I would say that that includes the runways, the taxiways, signage, lighting, fueling facilities, terminals, ground transportation facilities, such as airport roads, and also some of the safety and security infrastructure, such as access control. So we are, in some ways, property managers And next. Just a quick slide here. The FAA designates airports based on size, based on their passenger counts. And there's large hubs and medium hubs and small hubs. Santa Barbara, just unique piece of information here. We fall under the small hub category, which is actually 1/4, actually, it's 1/4 of 1% to, sorry, that's the medium hub. We're even smaller than that. The small hub airports have between 0.05% and 1/4 of 1% of the overall air traffic, passenger count on commercial. So it makes us sound pretty small, but there are only about 30 large hubs, 30 medium hubs, and then there's about 75 or so small hubs. And we are on the lower end of that small hub category. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because some of those tiers result in different regulatory requirements. There's some projects that we've gone forward with as recently as this year. The lactation room that was recently completed, that was a requirement based on the size of airport that we are. Another one is a service animal relief area is a requirement, again, based on what size airport you fall under. So just some examples of how that affects what we have to do to operate the airport. The big thing, though, is this, what is known as Part 139 compliance. The FAA issues an operating certificate to almost all airports that have commercial operations. There is a threshold, but it's extremely low. I think it's 10,000 passengers per year, so that is a very low threshold. So we certainly fall under that. It requires us to provide for things such as firefighting and rescue equipment. And again, there's a variation depending on the size of the airport as well as the types of flights available. There are inspections associated with this. It's typically an annual inspection, although the FAA can send their staff out at any time, but we usually know about it in advance, and our annual inspection did take place earlier this year, and I think we did finally get the letter back, and there are no deficiencies highlighted, no corrective actions required. So that was really great news. Hopefully we can continue on that path with future inspections. The other thing are these grant assurances. This was something I had heard a lot about before I came over to this role in the airport, and I've since learned a lot more about it. But essentially, in order to operate the airport and receive the federal grant money that comes to us based on our enplanements, it's pretty much by formula. There are other monies that you can get more competitively, but in order to get those funds, we are basically committing to the FAA that we will run the airport in certain ways, and those are known as the grant assurances, and there's 39 of them, and they cover a wide range of some very small things and some really, really large things. And just a couple of examples. One of them is that they require us to utilize a pavement maintenance management program. So it seems kind of in the weeds for a big federal agency to require something that specific, but that is one of the grant assurances. And then another has to do with airport revenues. So you'll hear a little bit more when I get into the state of our fiscal situation, but we bring in a lot of revenue on site. We are an enterprise, so we don't take in general fund money, and we cannot, based on these grant assurances, we can't hand out that money to anything other than airport-related purposes, and that's spelled out in the grant assurances. So our structure, our department, we have 6 divisions. I want to make sure I get these numbers right, but currently we have 71 employees plus 9.9 fire department employees who are stationed at the fire station the airport fire station, as well as 2 employees who are part of engineering but stationed out at the airport. So that brings a total in the low 80s of full-time positions, and we have a number of hourly positions as well. The division's administration, facilities, law enforcement, operations, properties, and projects. Let's see. So how have we been doing? I talked about this a little bit in our budget presentation, so I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this, but I do want to share that on the revenue side, the airport has 4 main revenue sources: commercial and industrial lease revenue. So we own a lot of property along that Hollister corridor, and we mostly rent those spaces through long-term leases to various entities. We also have non-commercial aviation, so that's generally our agreements with the FBOs, the fixed-based operators, who do the non-commercial side of the aviation industry. And then we have terminal revenue, which is primarily concessions and mostly really parking revenue. And then commercial aviation is our 4th revenue stream, and that's the agreements with the airlines. So as you look at this graph, this is showing historical quarterly airline passenger counts. I think it's a really neat graph because you can see the seasonality. Prior to COVID, it was kind of very predictable, where you'd see the build up in the summer, and then it would tail off a little bit into the winter, and then so on each year. And you can see we had some pretty good growth, and then came down very quickly when the restrictions were put in place around March of 2020. So that affected 2 of our primary revenue streams: the commercial aviation revenue as well as the terminal revenue. Those were both hit very hard for 1 full year and parts of 3 different years. However, we do have some other, well, I'll get into that on the next slide. You can see that we have recovered to at or above our pre-pandemic levels on the commercial aviation side. That's been great. It has boosted our revenues. However, a lot of those counts are due to Southwest's arrival, which has been great. They were given, as any new carrier would be, landing fee abatements, it's called, so some incentives for coming here and establishing their new routes. So it's not going to be until this year that we actually see full recovery of the commercial aviation revenue stream. However, we do have those other revenue streams, and that really helped us. If we look at non-commercial aviation activity, this is just number of operations, so basically landings and takeoffs, not by the commercial airlines. That looks a lot more steady. You definitely see that it dipped, but it came back really quickly, and I think this reflected a trend nationwide of people turning to other than commercial aviation means in order to continue to travel safely during the pandemic. So this really helped us. Our non-commercial aviation revenue stream continued to go up throughout the pandemic, and then our commercial industrial lease revenue remained steady throughout the pandemic, since most of those revenues were tied to long-term leases. So between the diversity of revenue streams that we had and some stimulus money that came through, I can say that today we are in a great position where we sit above our policy reserves, and that is very important because we have a robust airport capital improvement program. And here to speak to you today about that, I have Brad Klinzing, and I want to thank him for pinch hitting today. When he arrived at work today, he didn't know he would be presenting, but unfortunately our airport capital improvement project manager was unable to be here. Brad, thank you. If you could give some highlights on our capital improvement program.
Absolutely, Mr. DeMore. So good afternoon. My name is Brad Klinzing. I'm the supervising engineer. This first slide here is a 2008 project where we rehabilitated Taxiway Bravo. And that's just showing you an action shot there. And then go to the next slide. And this is a nighttime photo of that same taxiway right there outside the terminal. Next slide, please. And so this is our list of projects that are in design, various stages of design. We call this the ACIP. It's kind of a mixture of FAA projects as well as city-funded projects. The first one there, terminal expansion and parking structure. We came before council in June for that contract award, and that's just a conceptual design. We expect to have 3 concepts ready for sharing with the public by December. Taxiway H, or Taxiway Hotel, is an extension on the north side of our runway, main runway. We are currently in environmental review for that project, and full design isn't expected until 2024, with construction targeted for 2026. General Western Aero Hangars, we came before council in June for a feasibility study update. We have kicked that project off. A couple weeks ago, we had our structural site visit, and we expect to get our initial report back shortly. The fixed base operator, FBO redevelopment, we contracted with Jacobs or Lee Fisher a while back, but we came before council in July for an amendment to that, and we're looking at redeveloping a couple parcels on the airport. We're going to be looking at some development plans, a business plan, and working on an RFP as well for that redevelopment. The airfield marking, signage, and lighting plan, that one is targeted for construction in the summer of '23. That one is largely funded by the FAA. We're going to update some of our lighting to LED, as well as rename a few of the taxiways. The Southfield redevelopment is going to be the most recent project. We do expect to go out to bid in September of this year, and with construction lasting till midsummer of next year. And the general scope of that is to demolish a hangar, as well as add some rental car parking spaces and 3 overnight aircraft spots. And then taxiway G, M, and J. As Brian had mentioned, we have a pavement management program every few years. It's very standard for us to rehab various taxiways based on their pavement condition index. So those three taxiways are up next. Did want to mention that all these projects were part of the 2017 EIR. So there's nothing new proposed there. Most of these projects are very early in the stages, so there's going to be plenty of opportunity for public outreach sessions. Next slide, please. You may recall this image from the terminal expansion and parking structure slideshow that we had, but it just shows you an overview of the terminal area. The areas in blue are the 2 areas considered for expanding the terminal, and then the green area is one possible area for the parking structure. And we also anticipate that the terminal loop road will be reconfigured as part of this project. As far as our major planning efforts, the biggest out there is the master plan update. And so that contract came before council in July, and we're actually kicking that off right now, having various meetings with stakeholders to hear some of the concerns of the public. That contract is with Mead and Hunt. And we do expect that to last into the end of 2023. It will look at a 20-year forecast period. There's going to be some overlap with other studies, like the terminal expansion. They're going to be taking like a 1 to 10 year look at the terminal, and then the master plan will take it from 10 to 20 years. Also, a part of that master plan update is going to be noise study. We've heard from the public there are concerns regarding noise, and with the different fleet mixes that have been coming in and out of the airport, we definitely want to include the noise analysis as part of that. Also part of the master plan update is considering the climate change as well as alternative fuels and electrification of the aircraft industry. And so that kind of segues into our next slide as well. Talking regarding climate change and sea level rise, we do have roughly $250,000 in grant money to look at our vulnerability assessment as well as an adaptation plan, and we'll be looking at our local coastal plan update and shortly after the master plan is further underway, we're going to be looking at a drainage master plan as well. And I believe with that, I will turn it back over to Mr. Demore.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Klinzing. Finish up here, just talking a little bit about the Aircraft Noise Advisory Program and some opportunities for the public to be involved moving forward. Any discussion on airport noise really needs to begin with the Aviation Safety and Noise Abatement Act, which was in 1979. So this was, it's known as CFR Part 150 or FAR Part 150. It established criteria for assessing noise-related impacts on surrounding communities, and it also established a framework for doing the studies and establishing programs for airports to be able to go and get funding to address noise-related impacts that were above the threshold established through this, this act. Following the act, though, there were a number of airports who began to implement restrictions as the tool to limit noise-related impacts in their communities. So interestingly, and it seems like it took a while, but 11 years is maybe a long time for a new act to take place. But the Airport Noise and Capacity Act followed suit in 1990. And this, it appears, based on the timing and what's in this act, that it was in response to the airports who started to use these use restrictions. So what this act ended up doing, it really brought a lot of the control to the federal level. And they limited noise rule, they limited restrictions such as night curfews, caps on maximum noise levels, number of aircraft operations, and noise-based fees. Some of the airports today that have curfews or hour restrictions, I often get asked, well, Burbank, why don't you just do what Burbank is doing? Why don't you do what John Wayne is doing, or San Diego? The airport, the hourly restrictions that are in place today predated this Airport Noise Advisory, Airport Noise and Capacity Act of 1990. So today, if you wished to go down that path as an airport owner, there are a number of what are called statutory criteria. There are 6 of them that you would have to establish have been met in order for the FAA to approve doing that. And I've looked at what other airports have done in trying to do this type of restriction, and I haven't found an example yet of success. Almost in every case, well, in every case that I've seen, it was denied by the FAA because they couldn't meet all of the conditions, because you have to meet every single one of these conditions. And you know, there are things like the restriction is reasonable, non-arbitrary, and non-discriminatory. The restriction does not create an undue burden on interstate or foreign commerce. It's not exactly clear how you would evaluate that, but based on the history of attempts that have been made, it appears that the FAA typically will say no to these types of attempts at restrictions. We have done a Part 150 noise compatibility study here at SBA, and in the mapping of the noise impacts known as the noise contours, we did not find that there were any land uses incompatible with the noise exposure in the vicinity of SBA. Now, I say that, and I know there are people in the room and in the community who will say undoubtedly that they are impacted by noise. And I get that. I myself am very sensitive to noise. And in fact, there have been some nights, even recently, preparing for this item or other airport-related things, where I hear an aircraft in my house, windows closed, late at night. And I look on the app and I see sometimes there are actually aircraft passing overhead from LAX to Asia in the middle of the night. And I can hear that. Does it bother me? It doesn't wake me up, but I do hear it, and it's just interesting that that sound from 30,000 feet can make its way down. But then there are also times, 2 nights ago, 12:30, I heard the United flight. I don't know if it was coming from Chicago or going to Chicago. So I hear it, I understand the concerns, and I'm sharing today just from a federal standpoint and the guidelines that have been developed, our previous studies, and we've revalidated those studies with recent modeling. We don't have a noise threshold that exceeds what the FAA has established. So that makes it difficult for us to tap into funding to try to mitigate some of those impacts. We do continue to log all of our noise complaints that are received, and I would direct the public who are interested in doing so to look on our website to get more information, but also they can submit through this public view. There'll be a link on our website for that, and you can also call our automated noise advisory hotline number, which is listed here, 805-967-1900. So some opportunities to get involved coming up. Mr. Klinzing did highlight some of those with our capital projects that we have going on. There is Airport Commission. This today kind of feels like an Airport Commission meeting, being the only admin item. But we meet every month. It's third Wednesday of every month out at Airport Administration. Be happy to have the public attend those. And I expect that we will have noise on the agenda in the relatively near future. We haven't had that this calendar year, and it feels like it's time to do so. And then with the master plan update, there are stakeholder workshops that are already taking place and will be continuing to take place in the coming weeks. And as mentioned, part of that update will be an updated noise study, and that will come out in the next year. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. I'm available and happy to take any questions.
All right, questions from council. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. DeMore and staff for the presentation today. And I really appreciate starting off with the history of the airport. It's always fascinating, and it shows why there's a lot of value from the public in our airport, because we are one of the few remaining airports in the country that has a lot of the infrastructure going back to the 1930s and even earlier. That's still left in the country. So we take it seriously, and that comes up quite often at the administration hearings. So with that, I do have just some follow-up questions. I thank you for the report. First, speaking of historic, the hangars, you did mention them, and that the structural report is due soon. So what happens when the structural report comes back? What's the next process for the public to understand where we're going with the hangars?
I'll go ahead and try to answer that, and maybe Mr. Klinzing will jump in if he has more detail. But I would say a lot of it's going to depend on what comes back in that report. I suppose anybody who's been out there, even if they're not a structural engineer, would say, gosh, those things don't look like they're in great shape. But we're hoping that there's going to be a pathway to salvage those in some manner. And I know that there's strong interest from the community in keeping them. I think their number one objective would be to keep them in place, because that preserves not only the structure but the historical context. Whether or not we're able to do that really will depend on what comes out of this structural report. if we can keep them in place. There's floodway issues as well, so it could be that we could keep them there, but the possible uses of the space may be limited. So then it may be weighing what we can do, how much public enjoyment there could be out of the space if it has to be where it is and it can only be for certain uses, versus if it's relocated to a space that may allow for other uses, the public may be able to interact with it a bit more. So there's a lot to weigh on all of that. And then of course there's the big unknown of cost and where would that cost come from. So hopefully that's enough.
Yeah, so thank you. So that discussion would potentially take place also at the Airport Commission once we get more information on that. And you mentioned flooding issues, so would we be using more modernized flood mapping from FEMA or the federal government in terms of making the determinations? Because it's not just the structure, the structural integrity of the buildings, but also flood standards that we have to meet as well.
That's correct. And there is some allowance for historic structures to remain in place with certain mitigation measures. So I believe that's going to be part of this report that comes out, and that will help us to assess our options.
Perfect, and thank you for that. And before I get into noise, I have a few follow-up questions to noise. If you could just speak to the minimum standards issue that comes up quite frequently at the Airport Commission and has had a lot of public input throughout the process. So if you could speak to that, please.
Okay. Kind of hoping to have one meeting to not have to talk about minimum standards, but now it really is starting to feel like an Airport Commission meeting.
No, I do see some airport commissioners and former commissioners here, so.
I'm glad you asked the question, because that's been a big part of my work effort since January, and it's definitely worth highlighting. So when I came on board, I honestly didn't even know what minimum standards were, so it was a steep learning curve for me just to dive into that document and begin to understand what it meant for our administration, but also for the many users who are out there. And so for those who don't know, the minimum standards are something that an airport owner authority may elect to develop. They're not required by the FAA, but it helps to establish certain minimum standards or framework for aeronautical activities that take place on the airfield. So it can be things like restroom facilities provided by the fixed-base operator, something that detailed, or the number of tie-down spaces that each FBO provides, and then things like fueling and all of those types of details. It's a lot. It's pretty detailed, but it's as much detail as we want it to be. And a lot of the discussion on that document has surrounded flight instruction and independent operators. And I've been working really hard to try to find the middle ground that will allow our existing operators who have fixed places of business, so whether it be a flying school or a maintenance facility, that they can continue to thrive, but also to allow for some utilization of independence when it makes sense to do so. And it's been a lot of work, but I think we're getting close to a final product, and we will likely be taking that to the Airport Commission again. Another kind of minor tweaks to the previous draft will come to the Commission, I hope, next month in September.
Thank you. I just wanted to have that included as part of this presentation because it's so important to so many people, and that the work that you've been doing and working with both the operators, but also the general aviation side, because the airport is often thought of by the broader community as for commercial, but it has an extended use of general aviation for the public that's very important. So I just wanted to inform the public and just have that discussion is going on how we can balance the two going forward. And so I appreciate the work and look forward to what comes out of the new draft that's coming forward. So a few questions on noise follow-up. Just in general, it seems that we've had an increase in complaints and from the public about noise in the last few years, a couple right before COVID and then after COVID, after the flight was reinstated. And so Has that been the case that there's more flights, or what do you think is attributed to that, or are we having more complaints? It seems like it's just getting more coverage in local media and there's more people engaged, but can you just speak to the overall sense of your take on this?
Yeah, I guess my take on it is there's definitely a seasonality to it. When people are outside, summer months, when windows are open, which in Santa Barbara is a lot of the year, but we also have more operations in the summer as well. So we do see more complaints in the summer. It peaks around now, and then it does taper off a little bit. So there is some seasonality to it. It's kind of hard to say, how do we compare now to the past, because things got so disrupted with COVID, and we saw very little complaints for a period of time. But even then, there was still commercial operation taking place, and there was a lot of non-commercial aviation taking place. So I don't have those numbers available to me today to be able to reflect back and say, how does 2022 calendar year compared to like 2019, which would have been not impacted by COVID, but we have access to all of that information.
And I was just getting a general sense of it, on that. And you mentioned that there's also private aviation as well. Does that contribute to some of the noise that the public might be hearing, the private aviation jets or others versus commercial?
Yes, it definitely does. We have a lot of private jet activity at the Santa Barbara Airport, and definitely see a good percentage. I can't throw a number out there at you, but it's, I think it would, to give it a big range, it's between 10 and 50% of our total complaints.
Thank you. And then in terms of just measures that we've been able to look at that are within our control, and I appreciate you in the presentation delineating between the federal government and our roles and regulations, and then going back to 1979 and 1990 and the different restrictions, because we're getting those questions, I'm getting those on the council. What measures have we been able to take to reduce noise, and such as the alternative flight path? And there's two, because there's coming south and there's coming from the north. So have we been able to work with the airlines and the FAA to encourage use of the alternate flight path going over the ocean and then more Mesa? And then also, if you could speak to, from the other side, coming from Elwood, and how they might seem very similar, but they're different challenges in terms of approaching into the airport and safety. If you could speak to each of those.
Great. Again, good questions. So if it wasn't clear when I presented earlier, the FAA is responsible for the movement of aircraft in the airspace. They develop flight paths. We can try to influence them. We can try to, if you want to call it, pressure them. We try to work with them to let them know that there's a community concern, to hopefully elevate the development of a preferred approach that would hopefully minimize impacts. Depending on the situation, you might simply only be shifting the impact. With the main runway, which we call 725, if you're approaching it from the south, over the Hope Ranch, more Mesa area, hopefully not over those areas, but near those areas, but that should hopefully give people a picture of that approach. The FAA did establish a preferred approach for that, and we've seen just in the last 6 to 12 months much greater compliance with following that path. Fortunately, on that approach, with the more Mesa open space and some of the agricultural spaces that exist along the way to the runway, there is sort of a way to thread the needle and minimize impacts to residential areas. On the other side, it's a bit more challenging. There isn't as nice of a open space to kind of aim for. If you look at the map, you pretty much see, no matter what, there's a residential neighborhood along that route to get out over the ocean. So I don't know if there's a way we could work with the FAA to try to develop something along that approach route. That one's definitely more challenging.
But it is something that we can continue to look at for that side. And then I just want to make it clear that the FAA just didn't change the preferred approach. It came from, one, we received a lot of feedback from the community, so we were able to take that data and we were able to present that to the FAA. And it also took collaboration with you and our staff to work with the FAA and work with the airlines, first on a voluntary, but then to get this approach. So it didn't just happen. It was because we were proactively trying to work with them, even though we didn't actually control the flights, but try to inform their decision-making. In this case, it worked because we were able to get that preferred approach. I just want to make sure my understanding is correct so in the public.
If they're not hearing anything, they've got enough other things to do. So that is accurate.
And then one last thing is you mentioned the noise study, and it's at 65 decibels, I think is in the staff report. And it wasn't meeting that threshold to qualify, impacts that would qualify for funding for mitigations. But yet there is some, you mentioned this in the staff report again, that perhaps 50 decibels may be something that there are impacts to communities, and the federal government might be looking at that. Do you know if they are looking at a 50 decibel threshold for measuring, and if that might, for us, meet the threshold where we could get some impacts? And then two, if we would be able to try to get some information as part of the master plan update going forward to try to inform this and present any information through the master plan update to the federal authorities based on the 50 versus 65.
I'm going to have Andrew Bermond provide some more detail on that.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Friedman, thank you. Andrew Bermond, Facilities Manager and Acting Operations Manager. The FAA's most recent Authorization Act in 2018 directed them to look at a revised community noise threshold for exposure levels below 65 A-weighted decibels. Congress did not direct FAA to any other number. They just said explore it, and I think it is reasonable to expect Congress to take some sort of action when the reauthorization is scheduled to occur in 2023. Of course, that's assuming Congress acts within that time frame.
So 2023, just make a note that we could perhaps have some type through our legislative program or something through that means to opine on this whenever the public comment period is opened for the reauthorization, or other means that we could on lowering the threshold. So thank you. Appreciate your time and all my questions.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. DeMar. I'm going to sneak in a couple comments so I don't forget them later. And one has in particular just to commend you for your interim leadership out there in this time. You stepped into a role that had, in my perception, leadership difficulties or challenges for the organization out there. And from all reports I've heard, you've done a great job, fantastic job, better than great. And it's like you said, you stepped in with absolutely no experience, had a great learning curve, and I just want to commend you publicly for taking that role on and doing such a good job at it. And then the other quick comment to sneak in is also to just follow on Mr. Friedman's prompt on minimum standards and the lot of work you've done with instructors, independent operators, and flight clubs in particular. The situation that was out there was not a very good situation in terms of the ability of the community to be part of the airport too, the general community to be part of the airport, and I think that's really important for an airport. And again, I want to thank you for doing that work and bettering that situation. And then I probably have some kind of redundant questions, so I heard your answer. Sometimes people don't maybe hear the same answer that I hear, or I get to answer all the time. And so, and my questions really are more of I realize that the operations of the airport might even span, I'm sure it does, more space outside the city than it does inside the city. Definitely does, I guess. And my perception is generally what you're calling south to east, which I would have called, the opposite direction just because. But, and I live down off the end of Mesa Lane, so when they are landing over land, they are landing directly over my house. And they land, so I see them, I hear them. And they're varying routes, so I could be standing in my backyard and they're going right over my head, or I can be standing in my backyard and I see them offshore, all going to the same place. And then sometimes I can read the writing on the wheel well if I really wanted to, and then other times they're really high up. So this huge variance in what the guy or gal who's piloting this aircraft gets to choose from. I just want to hear from you again what dictates that and who gets to make that decision.
Again, I'll have Andrew jump in. He seems eager to share his knowledge.
Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Jordan, the pilot is the sole arbiter of the safe operation of his aircraft or her aircraft. And the FAA's direction from tower or through instrument approaches is, strictly speaking, advisory. That said, there are, just as when we're operating a motor vehicle on the ground, we have a choice of whether to go crosstown then uptown or uptown then crosstown. Pilots have the same sort of discretion in the air, whether they want to line up on center line earlier or later. We have, as through part of our Part 150 noise advisory program, we advise in response to noise complaints to the owner or operator of the aircraft that they did not follow our voluntary noise abatement approach, so that we can use that as a tool for informing pilots that is available. And the FAA, as previously mentioned, instituted the RNAV approach, which follows our voluntary noise abatement approach on the 2.5 end, which allows us to see a larger reduction in eastern Goleta Valley overflights for aircraft so equipped.
Okay, thanks. And then, so just anecdotally, I'm only smart enough in this area to be dangerous. So if you want to line up at City College and see the airport 15 miles off in the distance and you're in line with the runway, that seems kind of easier. If you want to stay out over the water, make a right over Moore Mesa at a lower altitude, make a left to line up with the airport at a much lower altitude. Is that one much more difficult in terms of a pilot having to do that than just lining up over City College and coming in for 15 miles?
Councilmember Jordan, it may be for specific pilots and specific aircraft, depending on their rate of descent, their speed and visibility. I wouldn't say one is definitively easier than the other. I think the presence of an RNAV approach makes it considerably easier to follow the instrument guidance on the noise abatement approach. But that's only been the case for this calendar year.
And then when people say they're flying low or too low, I don't really know what that means. So again, my perception is on the Mesa, watching them come in that direction, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, I can read everything I want to in the garden shop at Home Depot, watching those ones land, right? But coming in over the Mesa, what is too low? Is there a distance and height requirement out from the airport, or again, is that controlled by the pilot?
The regulatory answer is 1,000 feet above an urban area, unless on approach or descent to an airport.
Okay, so there's some latitude on an approach.
Correct.
On the pilot's path. And then this conversation's been going on for a couple of years, it seems like. And again, one of the things I heard was that the phrase for lining up at City College and coming straight in was published or charted, whereas the alternate to stay out over the water and come in over Moore Mesa was not, and that an attempt on our part to get that route published or charted, or another word I don't know, would result in more compliance by airline operators. Does something like that exist, an alternative like that exist?
Councilmember Jordan, I believe the reference to charting would be, again, in reference to the RNAV approach that was instituted earlier this year, which our commercial carriers do frequently use. Obviously, with each shift, we can have a different pilot, and that pilot may not be aware of it or may not feel the need to do it based on his or her need to, arrive on time, right? They're not necessarily focused on precisely following our noise abatement procedures, which is why our noise advisory program exists.
Okay. Then your slide on, with the bullet on expansion, I thought led off a key fact that I thought I knew, and that's so the terminal expansion and the parking expansion, those are being pursued right now to handle existing crowds, not future crowds, right? We have challenges already out there with people queuing up outside of zones they're supposed to be in, or parking, can't find parking, and that is at current customer loads, correct?
Yes, Councilmember Jordan, I think it said somewhere in here about demand-based.
Right.
So we have reached that demand that per the prior master plan, we've kind of triggered the need to move forward on these capital projects. And yes, if anybody was out there at the right time or really the wrong time this summer in the morning, there were sometimes it was unfortunate timing with TSA doing some upgrades on their equipment, but we certainly saw some long lines. But even once you're through the line at the checkpoint, the upstairs can be quite crowded because these aircraft are larger than what was anticipated, I think, when the terminal was built. So it's not very comfortable in those gate spaces, and our concessions are crowded. It's not the customer experience that people expect, and it's certainly not what they get at a lot of other airports. It's still, I think it's still a great terminal, and it's serving us well, but it's bursting at the seams.
Then last question, and which is coincidentally on that demand-based slide, which probably doesn't have anything to do with it, but what's the role of a community airport, really? Is it, and its role on serving the community? So if you Google, I keep hearing the words regional versus, muni versus regional airport, which of course, neither of those words are really in the FAA jargon that you showed me, but there's all kinds of returns on that, and the like goes national, regional, local, basic. So I'm assuming people are talking about what's the difference between a local and a regional. And if you look at the definition that's online, those are like a word apart from each other. They talk about linking. One talks about linking intra and interstate, while the next one says encouraging economic development by linking intra and interstate. So they're kind of like the same definition. But when we talk about what's our vision of a community airport and what's the FAA's vision of community airport, I'll just make an analogy that I think is that there's usually a tension in some communities dealing with coastal zones and what the Coastal Commission's goal is, and that's to get more people that don't normally have access to the coast to have access to the coast. And is that kind of the role of the FAA in particular too, to be that agency that ensures that needed air service and transport is allowed in a community? I mean, I see that tension there, and I see us sort of we always hide behind, well, that's an FAA rule or that's an FAA requirement, but there's a purpose there, isn't there? And can anybody speak to that?
Yeah, I think maybe there's several questions in there, and
Yeah, probably.
I'll ramble on a little bit and hopefully answer a few of them. But the purpose of airports nationwide, if you were to say, at the highest level, at the FAA level, what is the purpose? It's to move not only passengers but goods. There's an interstate commerce component to it, and there's recreation and there's business. There's a lot of different mixes and uses, and then you've got airports that are not commercial, right? They don't serve commercial airlines. And then you have some that, there are some that only do commercial, and then you've got some that are a mix. So thinking about our airport, kind of what can our airport be for our community, it is going to continue to be that mix of general aviation and commercial aviation, and I would like to see it that it has a thriving general aviation component to it. And when I say that, it isn't just the fixed-based operators working with businesses with their corporate jets, but it's also the local Santa Barbara resident who's got his own plane stored in a City T hangar. That kind of mix of general aviation, and then of course the commercial aviation. We want to have a strong, robust commercial aviation industry so that we can provide our residents with opportunities to travel. It's been really great watching this transition away from the, you hop on the little turboprop and you go down to LAX, or worst case scenario, you got that long flight all the way up to San Francisco, listening to the propeller the whole way. And then you go to your final destination from there. It kind of limited where you could get to and how quickly you could get there when those were that was your first stop. And it also made a lot of people think about just driving down to LAX as opposed to going through Santa Barbara. So we've seen that transition with a lot more destinations being offered and a lot more opportunity to get to your final destination in as little as one stop, hopefully only one layover at the max. So that's, in a nutshell, the vision. And there's a lot of work to do to get there.
Thanks again, and thanks to your whole team for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. I think we may have exhausted most questions. I'll try and keep mine briefer. So you mentioned flight routes, and there's a lot of discussion about the Mesa and different just places where we're not used to seeing flight routes. And I've just heard a lot of, and noticed myself, in the foothills, a lot more larger, lower flying planes, and I think you've answered the question that it's at the discretion of the pilot, but I've had questions about, like, which planes are these exactly, because they don't look like, United Flight coming out of the airport, but like low, rumbling, large aircraft. I think we had one at City Hall the other day that almost all of us sort of were like, what is that? And you mentioned the app, because that app tell us what's flying, or just maybe some more discussion of that, because people are really noticing loud, large flights in places we're just not used to.
Okay, well, that's interesting. The Councilmember said the operation the other day, I believe, was a military operation, which those are harder to track. But the links that I provided, I don't think that gets you to an app where you can go online. That was one of the things I noticed when I came to the airport, that there are a lot of aviation enthusiasts that as soon as they see an airplane in the sky, they jump on their phone and they're finding out what it is. And I've now become one of those people, and it drives my family crazy, because every time I'm traveling or whatever's going on, if I hear an airplane and I'm in a building, I'm looking it up to see what it is. But it is interesting. It'll tell you if it's United or if it's a private operation. I don't know. Sometimes you can see the path that it's been on, where it came from.
What is that app again? Did you mention the name of the app?
I could look up the bookmark
Before
on
you're
my
done
phone.
today, I would like to know, because I think people really are interested, and there is a lot of apprehension about, well, what is that large plane? And I get it a lot. I'm sure everybody does, but especially in the foothills and through Montecito, it's just not an area people are used to having a flight pattern through.
Yeah, I do know that there has been an effort within the county to do another mapping, LiDAR mapping. So if it was a repeated airplane, just making passes back and forth, but that would be a smaller craft. It wouldn't be that loud. So I don't have.
So I'll want the app before we're done. Thank you. And then when we talk about expansion, and it came up again in this about expansion of the airport, and I just want to be really, really clear on what expansion means. I want to be very clear. We're not talking about expansion of customer base or services or growing the capacity of the airport. It's more of an expansion of the physical space to accommodate what's already happening, or if you could
Yes.
clarify that for
Yeah,
us.
that's correct. And again, we mentioned demand-based planning or project implementation, and we've reached the triggers that were set forth in the 2017 master plan to go ahead with these projects, including the expansion. So it's based on the demand that is here today. It isn't for the purpose of attracting or growing the operation. We do have the master plan update that will be underway that will be more forward-looking, that basically looks at historical industry trends of growth, which is actually usually small single-digit percentage growth, and then making a new master plan that could have projects in that would anticipate future growth that may or may not come.
So for the public and for my understanding too, if there were to be discussions of growing the operations, there would be a master plan for that, or public input or council input. There would be more discussion if we were talking about growing the operations.
Well, yeah, it's a good question, because really, whether or not the operation grows is, we have indirect control over that. Basically, an airline can come to us and say, hey, we want to fly to, whatever city, and we want to do it so many times a week during these times. As long as we have the capacity to handle it, we will allow that to happen. There isn't a mechanism for us to say no to that. We are constrained at certain hours right now. If somebody says we want to fly out at 6 a.m., they know, they won't even approach us about that. But if they can fit it in during a period of time when things are quieter, that would be a possibility. So that's growing the operation from a number of passengers standpoint, but not necessarily
The number of planes.
infrastructure standpoint.
I guess what I'm concerned about is if we build it, they will come. And right now, we're constrained a little bit by that we don't have the physical capacity for more. And if we're building out the capacity, from what I've understood it so far, is building it, expanding to accommodate what the services already provided. I'm just asking, what's the stopgap then if now we've expanded the physical capacity? Are we then in a situation where we're going to be bursting at the seams again in that new capacity?
Right. What I would say is the operation that we have right now, there's a lot more larger planes than was anticipated previously. And many of them, it's called remain overnight. They spend the night here in Santa Barbara before flying out first thing the next morning. And we're pretty limited in where those can be stored. And then we also have the boarding bridge limitation. So it's not an ideal situation how we're operating now, and the expansion will allow those operations to take place more efficiently. But there's not going to be, Andrew, Mr. Bermond could speak more in more detail on this, but as far as like how much further room do we have to grow after that, I think we're getting pretty boxed in down there on that space that we have with the existing terminal.
Councilmember Snedden, I want to just remind everyone of our recent past experience where we had an airline terminal that we'd used for decades that was bursting at the seams, in the up until 2011, and we opened the current airline terminal, which was 5 times the size of the original, and we had a substantial decrease in commercial aviation activity. We had a reduction in number of routes, number of airlines, number of annual enplanement passengers. If there were any opportunity for a capital project to have induced growth in aviation, that absolutely would have been it. The program that was described earlier is a relatively modest increase in comparison to that change that occurred in 2011. The only advice that I have for forecasting aviation enplanements in the future is try to forecast the S&P 500 because it tends to be based on larger national economic trends as to when an airline expresses interest in SBA.
Okay, thank you. I'll make it as a statement. If we were going to get bigger, bolder, better, broader, whatever, I would want council input and public input on that. I think I'm okay with, as it's been described, you know, accommodating the space of the airport for what is already happening, and I would actually scale it back a little bit, but I realize we're past that. But if there were going to be, what I really would want input on is if this now is like, oh, well, now we have more space, and so now another large aircraft operator can come and supply more services. I think at that point, I'll just make it as a statement. I'm not sure how to ask it as a question. I would want a little stopgap on public input on that further. But what I'm understanding is that this expansion is just to accommodate the services already provided. Is that yes? Yes, okay, thank you. And then well, yeah, on climate change, so you mentioned it here, and I know we've talked about it in the master planning too. It's interesting to me and encouraging that you're mentioning not just the impacts of climate change on the airport, you know, flooding or other issues, but also sort of the airport's impact on the climate when you talked about alternate fuels. And I'm very interested, it's something you've mentioned just offhand a while ago on electric, you know, ification of planes, and it's maybe a longer timeline out, but would that also impact noise impacts, and how does that figure into you know, the emissions of the airplanes, and how does that figure into the EIR? You know, I'm like thinking of the channel, and if you have tankers going back and forth, it creates quite a bit of emissions that impact the coast. And so how are the emissions factored in, and then the timeline maybe for electrification?
Councilmember Sneddon, I think on the electrification piece, we're hearing that things are getting really close. There are a lot of prototypes that have been tried, but it's all a lot smaller aircraft. So if the technology evolves to the point where it's viable from a commercial standpoint, I think you would see that being something that could work for some of the shorter routes. But again, those would be smaller craft, probably more frequent operations. I don't know about the noise. You would think that it would be quieter, but I don't know. If you're the turbine makes a lot of the noise, and if that's going to be pretty similar, whether it's combustion or electrification. But I'm really excited to see what happens in that with that part of the industry. I was just hearing from Surf Air that they've been looking at hybrid technology. So that's another thing that's out there where, you know, the takeoff is a real big power consumer. But if you can get an aircraft up into the air on combustion, once it's up there, you can probably go on electric for most of the rest of the way. So that's an interesting idea. And if you think about what happened with cars, first we saw the hybrids, and then we started seeing the all-electric. So it might be similar with the aviation. And then on the sea level rise piece, was that the other kind of component to your question? That's where I wish Ms. Izo was here. She could answer that in more detail. Brad, do you have any more information on the studies that are ongoing for that?
Not too much to add there on that. Sorry for that, but it is something that we can follow up on and get back.
Yes, I'll follow up with you separately. I know we're, you know, in our adaptation plan and working with different departments, and the airport clearly is a large department to be working with, so we can have more on that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think what you guys have been very diplomatic about, but what's really true, is you have very limited control over a lot of the things people have a lot of concerns about, and things as in terms of traffic and passenger loads from a commercial standpoint are determined not really by, you know, what kind of lounges we have or rental car facilities, but it's determined by a lot of other things, like Frontier had great passenger loads, boom, they were gone to the East Coast. And, we got Southwest in, but, and Alaska Air has gone back and forth. And these are decisions made remotely. It's not really under your control as much as we, maybe like it to be. But quick question before we get to our comments. I noticed that in your chart, and it had been laid out here as well as anecdotally, the general aviation became increasingly more important during COVID, and that certainly there's been a lot of, not the amount of emphasis a lot of folks would like to see with general aviation, but now we're on the cusp of doing these new FBO build-outs on the north side to move so we can get this thing done. I wasn't really sure, we don't have much of a precise timeline. You mentioned the RFP as far as the development of the site, but what does a timeline look like for actually getting the FBOs onto the north side and getting them built out and getting to the facilities that I think GA would like to see happen sooner than later?
Yes, Mayor Rouse, to answer that question, we're working with our consultant on what we want to have in a redevelopment. So we want to put ourselves in the driver's seat where whatever we put together, the scope, it includes all of the elements that is needed from airport administration standpoint, but also from this goal, this objective that I mentioned earlier of having a thriving GA community. We're working with the consultant. I think part of that effort would be good to see what's happening at other successful airports that have a strong FBO with the thriving GA activity. Really, the goal, the timeline on this, we're working on with the FBO. So there's the redevelopment and then there's the relocation. So with the Southfield project, Atlantic is moving to the north side of the airfield, Atlantic Aviation, one of our 2 FBOs. And Signature is shrinking a little bit. They're also on the north side. They will have new leases that expire. They're not on the same timeline, unfortunately, but it's at least 4 years, and then there's some option years. So that's kind of the minimum end. And from what I know of big capital projects in the city of Santa Barbara, that would be very ambitious to be done in that time frame, but it's nice to have an ambitious goal. So that's sort of what we're looking at.
Well, I think the communication flow between your offices and especially the Airport Commission and us is going to be really vital during that whole time. We'll move to public comment on this item. And for you guys have waited long for this, so first is Councilmember James Kiriakou, and we have 3 minutes at the podium, please.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse and members of the City Council, and to Councilmember Jordan and our Mesa neighborhood friends, let me just say, welcome to the Goleta experience. I'm James Kiriakou from the Goleta City Council, and I'm speaking on my own behalf and in support of the comment letter provided by our Planning Director, Peter Imhoff, but also to highlight concerns that I've heard from some of my constituents who are significantly impacted by the airport. It was referenced earlier that this airport truly started at the Casa Lima site in the Samarkand neighborhood where Municipal Golf Course is today. So imagine with me if you had just stayed there and were operating at the kind of capacity that you're at now. You would basically be looking at the golf course, Adams School, and Earl Warren Showgrounds. That would be about the scale of it. So imagine the impacts on the Mesa, San Roque, some of the other neighborhoods. What would the public process be? What would the transparency be? What would be the shared governance there? While the region benefits economically and recreationally from SBA, Goleta gets a lot of great benefits from the airport. We also get a lot of the impacts. And so what I'm asking today is if you could just give direction to your staff to do a couple of things. One is to reschedule the airport workshop for Goleta that was originally scheduled for next month in September. And when you do that, to ensure that there's a representative from the FAA present. Let's all make sure that we're on the same page, hearing the same story about what is and isn't possible when it comes to noise. What are the things that are within purview of local folks? What are the things that are only the domain and the jurisdiction of the FAA? I think if we all hear the same story in the same room at the same time, a lot of these issues of what can we and can't we do would really be alleviated. Further to that, if we could provide simultaneous Spanish translation and interpretation at that meeting, working with our staff, that would be wonderful. A lot of the neighborhoods that are in that area are historically underrepresented and historically excluded communities, people of color, monolingual Spanish speakers. It would be good to be able to make sure that everyone can participate and understand what's happening. And then third, if you could return to, your staff return to City Council with a plan that looks at what are the possibilities for allowing some of your regional partners, the unincorporated area, Goleta, to have some kind of a seat at the table. The rules for the Airport Commission allow in the right circumstances for someone from Goleta, someone from the unincorporated area to be part of the commission if they meet the right circumstances. Why not just formalize it and allow everyone to have a seat at the table so that we're all working together, even as you manage and maintain your ultimate governing authority and jurisdiction. Finally, if you could just work on developing a better complaint monitoring system so that we have a better sense of what's happening, when are things getting resolved, are they getting resolved in an orderly fashion, et cetera. And then the last thing is, let's see here. I saw some videos from a member of the community the other day. There's an increase of travelers that are parking in Old Town Goleta, neighborhoods like Placentia, Matthews, and others, where they're parking their vehicles and then they're leaving it there for numerous days and taking an Uber to the airport. So they're avoiding your long-term parking fees and they're taking up parking real estate in Goleta. Maybe there's a way that we can work together to make sure that you're getting the revenue you deserve and we're maintaining our parking. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try this next name. I think it's Yuri Solove.
You got it right.
Did really? Amazing. 3 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for letting me bring up a few comments today. I'm going to be very specific. Airport noise, all that stuff is all part of my life because I live on Pacific Oaks, a few hundred yards south of Gersh Park. And, but in this case, I want to bring and highlight one particular aircraft which has suddenly, this year made an appearance in our airspace. It's called an Osprey V-22, Bell Boeing Marine Military Aircraft. As far as I know, it could now also be commercial. Well, it tends to fly very low, it seems, and it flies with a very heavy air pressure wave coming off from the rotors, because those rotors are huge because they tilt upwards to go vertical and they tilt forward to go forward. And it takes a lot to wake up the sleeping bear in me, but this aircraft has definitely done it. And it's very dangerous and has a very long history of safety issues. This may be something that you were mentioning before was happening in your area as well. Now, I'm not sure if it's military or if it's now some sort of commercial-based facility, aircraft like taking people out to the oil platforms or whatever. In any case, it flies very low. It's very identifiable. I can identify it. I know when it's coming because I can hear it. And it sits over you forever, it seems. I've been monitoring it since early of this year. When it started coming, I said, oh, that's interesting. It's an Osprey. What's it doing over in our airspace? Why a Marine aircraft here? But it takes a lot to get me going sometimes. August 2nd, 9:20 to 9:50, this aircraft made multiple passes, not just over my house, but over all of Goleta. It got to where you could not hear it dissipate at all. And it was doing it at a level of probably 250 to 300 feet above the ground. August the 9th, 8:31, same thing. This time, I could make out the distinctive details of the aircraft. That's easily maybe 200 feet. That thing would have hit the UCSB tower if it was over that. That's unacceptable. The aircraft has had 56 fatalities in 22 recorded incidences that had casualties. Now, there were multiple incidences outside of that. In fact, the Japanese have very special affection for that aircraft, as do the Philippines, because that aircraft is harbored there quite a bit.
I need you to wrap up, please.
Yeah.
Your time's up.
8:10, 6:24 in the morning, I'm sorry, in the evening, and 8:29 yesterday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's the first time I've heard it come by. And it is seriously low to where the windows, I'm afraid that they're going to break. It actually knocked my wife out of bed one night when when she was ready and sleeping. Thank you for your time. I'm hoping that you can come up with some sort of solution for this that isn't going to accelerate things and make it more contentious. But if we don't do something, it will become more contentious.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cecilia Fabulich.
The Osprey aircraft is like having your head in a garbage disposal for the entire time.
Can you pull the microphone down just so we can, thank you.
I want to share something with you. Well, I guess it didn't record. It stinks, huh? How about on my bedroom pillow? The point is that I measured this against this wonky app that I have that measures, it's the NIOSH CDC decibel meter, and these sounds come in at like 90, and up to, I've recorded one up to 110. Now, the noise study that they're going to do is going to be in our off-season. If it's next year, it's going to be between January and May. The increase in our flights occurred over Memorial Day weekend to now. This is the peak season. I am requesting that the City Council order their own independent noise study because the airport has to follow these FAA regulations about CNEL or averaging out a 24-hour period, but that doesn't count the times when these aircraft are landing. You combine it, you stir it up in with the silent moments when there are no aircraft at all. Okay? I moved here from LA, where I lived within a mile of LAX and the North Runway. I never had this much noise. I have started a petition. These are all voters, guys, and Lolita. And what I want to say is the environmental impact of the expansion of the airport. They're expanding a passenger load someplace on their website. They talked about an increase of 79% in the next 48 months. Well, how does that not increase operations? How can operations not be affected by that? The city of Long Beach has, their noise ordinance includes aircraft, and their county prosecutor has prosecuted repeated offenders that don't pay attention to the noise abatement procedure. And they've collected over, thousands of dollars from repeated offenders. We've got to wake up. We want the airport to proceed in a safe, environmentally safe process. What I
Need you to wrap up, please.
wrap up. Okay. In the end, we are going, Clean and Quiet SBA is my organization. We haven't begun our media blitz. Why? Because this affects our property values too, doesn't it? Let's all look at reality. I don't want to spread this out to the news media and, paper everybody. But tell me you're going to do something about it, and we will be quiet. Thank you.
Madeline Monchump.
Good afternoon, and it is a beautiful Santa Barbara afternoon.
The main
Am I supposed to
microphone,
be
yeah,
here?
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
I want you to know I'm very tired because my morning was not good. I was awakened at 1:40 a.m. for the second day in a row by a plane leaving the Santa Barbara airport. 1:40 a.m. And I wasn't able to get back to sleep. I wonder how many local residents are feeling sleep deprived as I am today. I was able to go back to bed for a few hours, like 6 o'clock or something till 9, but a lot of people can't do that. They've got to go to work. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't get back to sleep. I had had almost 4 hours of sleep, but was at that point too tired to accomplish anything productive, but couldn't get back to sleep. I was in and out of bed trying to go to sleep. So around 5 a.m., I was sitting in a chair drinking hot water and eating a bagel when the hum of the Santa Barbara airport began. I had downloaded a noise sound level meter, and I decided to try using it. I'd used it outside last night, and it was over 100 when a plane went by. So I didn't know how to, save it, but this time I was able to save it, and it was recorded at 5:34 a.m. An airplane left the Santa Barbara airport, heading toward Elwood, away from me. My noise app registered 94.7 decibels. This was in my house, but near an open window. So I was awakened at 1:40. I was up at 5 o'clock, and the things were starting at the airport already. 5:34 is a plane I recorded. A couple of planes went out before that. It's just not right. Once again, I say the quality of life is being destroyed for those that live within many miles of the Santa Barbara airport. I love the airport. I think it's a wonderful asset, but we've got to do something before it gets so out of control we can't. So again, I think we need to address nighttime flight hours. We need our sleep. Thank you for listening, and I hope you can do something. And
Thank you.
Thank you for the great report. It was very good.
Kathy Najanga Dykes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'm Kathy Janega Dykes. I'm president and CEO of Visit Santa Barbara. And I want to thank Mr. Damore for such an impressive report. I too learned a lot, especially about aviation history. We at Visit Santa Barbara have been very fortunate to have a strong relationship with our airport for a number of years, and we're clearly seeing the benefits of the partnership for the residents and visitors alike. I just want to touch on a few positive things that Mr. Damore talked about, and maybe respond to Councilmember Jordan's question about what is the role of a community airport as well, too. Because really having frequent and affordable commercial air service is critical to the economic vitality of our region. For our hospitality industry, certainly, our educational institutions, when we look at the number of students that use our air service, local corporations, and even our nonprofits as well. But also, just as important, our residents are also enjoying flying to these new cities that are serviced by our various airlines. And the effects of this partnership have really led to more competitive airfares, reducing the costs of travel for non-tourism businesses, our residents, and our visitors to the area. And as our country is increasingly returning to flying, our partnership with the airport has contributed to increased overnight visitor volume in Santa Barbara. These are the visitors who in turn sustain many of our local businesses. We clearly saw that after the onset of the pandemic. They create jobs in our service economy and really play a significant role they pay a significant amount of taxes to the city government, which of course provides critical services to all our local residents. We saw July transient occupancy tax increase. They were 32% higher than July 2019. And we also don't think it's a coincidence that we saw strong air passenger volume for the month. So I want to thank the airport staff, city staff, and this council for all of your support you have offered toward air service development. Together, we're so proud of this beautiful facility that's certainly a breeze to travel through and provides the convenience we're all seeking when we're traveling these days. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis Houghton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm Dennis Houghton. I am an airport commissioner. I've had the pleasure of serving on the commission for nearly 4 years. And when I first presented before this august body 4 years ago, I said, we have a good airport, but we can have a great airport. And so when I learned that the airport staff was going to be doing a presentation today, I said, boy, I should participate in this. So I just made some brief notes capturing my feelings about the airport and our community. I take a societal perspective on life. I spent my life in biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, and infectious disease. So the doctors always think, what can we do to immunize our community? What's best for the community? Sometimes they hold off on using expensive new drugs and the community can pay. But sometimes they get their act together and vaccinate the whole community early on and we avoid a plague. So the airport provides major access to North America. I mean, you can, with one connecting flight for Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, Vegas, Sacramento, or Oakland, you can go anywhere on our continent. It's remarkable. The airport is within 20 minutes from nearly all Santa Barbara and Goleta neighborhoods. I have an issue with my son. He's now 28 years of age, but he doesn't want to go to the airport until 1 hour before the flight departs. And so this is not a typical scenario in America. We are very fortunate to have this amazing airport so easy within our grasp. The airport is also critical in times of our wildfires and our mud flows. When we had the Great Montecito mud flow and the Thomas Fire, that was our forward operating base for our first responders. And so we always want to keep that airport in mind when it comes to these natural disasters. The airport speeds transit for employees, vendors, and customers of our UCSB spin-out companies that require budget-sensitive short notice for travel. My son visiting us this past week was told, you need to go up to San Francisco on Thursday and we'll cover you. And when my son told me this, I said, well, that's going to be $400. It's short notice. I said, try Southwest to Oakland. He looks, $190, Dad. Wow, I bet United's $400. Nope, they matched it, $190. That's what competition brings when you have a thriving commercial air service airport like we have at Santa Barbara. We are making progress against noise. Boy, I empathize with the community when it comes to the noise, especially if you're in the flight path. I live in the flight path. I live on the Mesa, about 6 miles directly east of runway 25. And I'm actually pleased to see the progress we're making. The mainline aircraft now being deployed, the major airlines are doing a much better job. They are clearly off the shore of the Mesa. Every now and then there is a variant, American Airlines, that seems to not have gotten the memo, but it seems like it has improved. And new flights from Southwest are bringing tourists to Santa Barbara. It helps our retail and restaurant business to grow and prosper. We all benefit with a healthy retail and restaurant scene.
I'll need you to
I'm over
wrap up,
time,
please. Yep.
but let's support our airport. And I know we're doing our best to help our community with issues with noise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joni Good?
Hi. So I'd like to address my concerns about the airport expansion. In an article in News Hawk dated June 21st, the article titled Santa Barbara Moving Ahead with $100 Million Airport Terminal Expansion. I've been growing more and more concerned about what that means. The article indicated this expansion is fueled by a 27% growth in passengers since 2011 and a projected 79% growth by the year 2032. So how can you have a 79% growth without there being additional flights added? That doesn't seem to jive for me. So right now, I live in the Nolita neighborhood behind Lane Farms, and occasionally the planes do come down low over the house. We stop our conversations or mute or stop the TV, and it's a minor inconvenience. But my concern is that if the airport is going to grow passengers by 79%, that indicates to me more flights, and I worry about the quality of life for those of us who live in those neighborhoods, in addition to the environmental impact. So it seems that the city of Santa Barbara enjoys the benefits. Goleta does enjoy the benefits, but Goleta is also the residents that suck up the negative impact, which is quality of life and a decrease in our property values if the airport is going to expand its passengers, meaning more flights. And that's basically what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Carl Hopkins.
Good afternoon. I want to start off by saying what a wonderful airport we have here in Santa Barbara. You have an excellent director and excellent staff. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe both Kathy, who's left, and Dennis Houghton stole most of my thunder, so I can just reiterate a great deal of what they said. I would point out that in 2017, as part of the master plan, UCSB conducted an economic impact report for the airport. That's 5 years ago. They found the airport had an economic impact of over $200 million to the local area and over almost 2,200 jobs. I suspect it's significantly more than that by now. We do have early flights. That is a curse of living on the West Coast, but I think living on the West Coast more than makes up for it. Getting to the East Coast requires that we have flights taking off earlier. The issue of the flying either over the City College, Mesa, Hope Ranch versus offshore is much better than it was before. The RNAV approaches that were briefly discussed in there means that the commercial airlines can fly to a point offshore near the Moore Mesa and then curve in around the Moore Mesa and land. That's currently not available to all aircraft, but I believe that the airport and the FAA are working on making that generally available. I, for instance, in my plane can't use that because that is specific to those airlines. That, on the other hand, almost all of the planes can and should fly effectively the same approach. That is, remain offshore, enter a 2-mile left base for runway 25. And to the extent that we can encourage air traffic control to give that instruction, it is true that the pilot had discretion, but if given that instruction, remain offshore, enter a 2-mile left base, cleared runway 25, you had better do that because otherwise you're violating. Why can you violate? You can either ask for something different or you can declare an emergency. But you can't just go any place just because you feel like it. Somebody asked about electric aircraft. They are much, much quieter than the Piston and particularly the jets. I tried to look up here on my phone to find out there just the other day, the first commercial, not yet with passengers, I believe it was in the New York Long Island Sound, flew a 10-passenger all-electric airplane. And I don't think they're going to be in the next year or 2 or 3, but I think all of us, I hope, will live to see a widespread use of electric aircraft. A comment was made about the A comment was made about members of the Airport Commission. The current rule says 4 must be in the city, 3 may be in the county. In the 15 years I've been associated with the commission, 3 have always been in the county. And one last note, if you want to know how high an airplane should be, and you're good at trigonometry, start a line at the end of the runway and run it on a 3-degree slope. And that's where our aircraft should be and normally are.
All right, thanks very much. And Madam Clerk, we have some online speakers.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have 3 speakers. We have Michael Glick, Gordon Feingold, and Peter Imhoff. Michael Glick, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm calling from Elwood. A fair amount of discussion about the FAA today and what's, quote, reasonable. I have a rhetorical question. I know you guys can't respond, but would it be reasonable if I took my 4-wheel drive Ford F-250 Super Duty pickup and backed it into anyone's driveway at 11:30 at night and revved up my engine and drove off? That wouldn't be reasonable. But what if I came back at 11:45 and then again at 12:15 and then again at 5:15 in the morning and then 5:45, 6:15, 6:22, 6:28? That wouldn't be reasonable. Would it be reasonable if I did it night after night? Of course not. This is what's happening to the surrounding community in Elwood and to the east of the airport. Some people refer to that as south, but it's really Compass East. I'm a sailor. People talk about all the reasons why they can't mitigate this. Well, they're doing it for Hope Ranch, and in the past, they used to do it in Elwood. I've lived here since '85, and the recommended flight path over Elwood was banking out over the ocean just like it is over Moore Mesa to avoid Hope Ranch. It was the same deal on both sides of the airport. Sure, there's residential areas. They can't avoid every single residential area, but that doesn't mean you just throw up your hands and go, oh, well, we can't avoid every single residential area, so we're just going to fly straight out over all of them. You know, there's a truism about excuses that's not appropriate for a public setting like this, but we all know what that truism is. You have a responsibility to mitigate the impacts as much as possible. You know, if you want to have the economic benefits and all the other benefits of the airport, you have to do the work. Elderly and infirm people need to sleep. It's a health and safety issue. Sleep deprivation is a health and safety issue. People go off to work, they drive vehicles, they operate heavy equipment. That's not safe if they're getting woken up all the time. Don't say you can't do it. We know you can. You do it for Hope Ranch. You used to do it for Elwood since 1990. I know that. I've lived here since '85. You used to do it in Elwood since 1990, okay? Don't say you can't do it. I'm sure if it was your house, you'd find a way. And yes, Santa Barbara is trying to be a regional airport. They're a community airport trying to be a regional airport.
We need you to wrap up, please.
You've got to do the work.
Thank you.
You're taking away the rights for us to enjoy our property.
Okay, thank you.
And
very
lastly, I'll wrap up, but if
You're out of
lived here
time.
long, you might be familiar with the Elwood Bluffs. The moral of that story is don't mess with Elwood.
Okay, thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Gordon Feingold. Gordon Feingold, please go ahead.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm Gordon Feingold. I'm a 55-year Santa Barbara resident, and I've been a user of the airport as both a commercial and general aviation user for 48 years since I got my pilot's license at Apollo Airways in 1974. So I do know the airport pretty well. I also was a participant on the master plan committee. We worked 5 years with a lot of community outreach and a lot of work from a lot of people we came up with the master plan that was approved with the 650-page EIR approved by the council in 2017. That called for improvements in the general aviation facilities that, of course, never happened. And it's very frustrating for us to have put all that work into it and have nothing happen. I believe the most recent airport director, who's no longer here, basically dismissed all that work and all that money that was spent with 2 words, which is plans change. So I hope that we can now move forward and actually do something, and we don't just study it to death, but actually improve our general aviation facilities, which, as someone who flies all over this country, many airports, are really an embarrassment here. They're truly below the standards that Santa Barbara should expect. Now I'd like to talk about noise a little bit. As a 7,000-hour pilot who flies all over this country, I can tell you exactly what the problem is for a great majority of it, and that is that there is no nationalized standard nor dissemination of noise abatement procedures. So when I go into fly into Poughkeepsie and I look at my charts in my chart book, there is no noise abatement procedure published there that I can look at. Even if the city of Poughkeepsie or Santa Barbara has created a noise abatement procedure, which Santa Barbara has, and it's a good procedure. But pilots that fly in here do not have that in front of them in their charts. So until the FAA, on a national basis, both standardizes a format for and then disseminates part of our regular charts, noise abatement procedures, we don't know what the noise abatement procedures are. So until that happens, you can spend all the money you want on studies and everything else. Not a lot is going to happen to affect that. So we as pilots would love to know what those procedures are, but it's beyond the ability of Santa Barbara to publish those charts so that all pilots can see them. So that will help a lot. I was also on the noise abatement committee, so I really do sympathize, and I try to do whatever I can as a pilot to help the noise in Santa Barbara. But I know all of us as pilots would like to do that if we simply had those plates in front of us. So whatever we can do to influence the FAA to do that, that would be great. Finally, I'd like to strongly encourage the City Council to make permanent Bryant DeMoor's status as the airport director. He's fantastic. Unlike the previous occupant of that seat, he knows and loves Santa Barbara, and it shows. So while someone else might look better on paper in terms of their airport knowledge, Brian will be a great, great airport director, and I hope that happens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Final speaker.
Our final speaker is Peter Imhoff. Peter Imhoff, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Peter Imhoff, Planning and Environmental Review Director for the City of Goleta. As you may have seen, we submitted a comment letter on this item today, and I'd just like to reiterate our comments. First, I'd like to thank the Council and airport staff for being willing to work collaboratively and proactively with the City of Goleta to address airport operation issues affecting both of our cities. We especially appreciate airport staff's proactive approach to date in highlighting and addressing the noise issues and Council's engagement with these issues. Operations at Santa Barbara Airport do have an outsized influence on the City of Goleta and its residents, since Goleta is almost entirely located in the airport influence area. And as you've been hearing, aircraft noise in particular continues to be a major concern for Goletans. Over the past several months, we've received numerous noise complaints from residents living under the main runway flight path. Residents are being affected, and the problem is unfortunately getting worse, not better, especially with the uptick in aircraft activity post-pandemic and the scheduling of early morning and late evening commercial flights. We are pleased that the master plan update will include a new Part 150 noise study to help study this issue and possible solutions. And we are also pleased that airport staff is working to arrange a public workshop in Goleta to discuss the airport master plan, the terminal and parking expansion plans, and the noise complaints. That public workshop will be an important touch point for our community and an opportunity for the public to air concerns about flight noise and for us to begin to identify solutions as part of the airport master plan update. As that master plan update process unfolds, we would respectfully request that the Council continue to take these issues seriously and consider and direct airport staff to pursue 3 actions to address flight noise concerns. First, to identify alternate flight tracks for flights taking off from runway 725 that route aircraft out over the ocean instead of over Goleta's residential neighborhoods. Second, impose a flight curfew to eliminate very early and very late flights. And third, to seek Federal Aviation Administration approval as necessary for these alternate flight tracks and the flight curfew. We are confident, in closing, that working together, we will find the necessary solutions to support airport operations while at the same time protecting our communities from excessive noise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, it's back to council. Ms. Harmon? No? All right. Anybody else have a comment? Ms. Sneddon and Mr. Friedman. Oh, Mr. Friedman and Ms. Sneddon.
All right, thank you. I did have a couple questions for staff before I get into my comments based on the public comment, in particular from Councilmember Kyriakos and Mr. Imhoff. The first is the flight curfew. I believe we addressed this you talked about this during the presentation, but is there a way we can engage, at least have that conversation with the FAA or our Congressman's office to look at that particular issue?
Councilmember Friedman, I liked the suggestion from the Councilmember Kyriakou that we try to bring the FAA into one of these public meetings, because it's one thing for me to say what I'm seeing the rules are, and they seem pretty clear from different rulings that the FAA has taken, but to hear it straight from the FAA I think would carry a lot of weight with the community. So I don't know what our chances are of bringing them in, but I'm sure they get this request a lot and probably know exactly what they need to say. So hopefully it's going to be an easy thing to get them to participate. But
Great, that's my second question. I was going in the most recent, so that was the second, if we could do that. And if so, if we need to, it seems there's a support to postpone the meeting, which was scheduled, as I understand, for September, but if there is the possibility of having the FAA representative there, I think it would be time well spent to reschedule the meeting if we can make that work. And then, of course, have Spanish translation as well as possible at that meeting. And then in terms of, maybe this is for Ms. Bjork or maybe Mr. Damore, but on the issue of the commission, this has come up in the past at the Airport Commission on having, not reconstituting, but adding a representation from Goleta. And I know that Mr. Hopkins had said that the way it's commissioned now is that there's four representatives from the city of Santa Barbara and then 3 from the county, which allows people from Goleta or Nolita to participate. And we have added the or the council liaisons, myself being the current appointee to the liaison to the commission, but we also have Councilmember Richards from Goleta, so we added that. But in terms of actually changing the membership, how does that work, and are there implications on that?
Mayor Rouse, Councilmember Friedman, it's a charter committee, and I believe the membership is laid out in the charter committee. Your easiest course of action as a council, you have complete discretion in which members you appoint, and you could prioritize appointing people who meet those groups that you want without taking any further action. You have that discretion.
And that would be within the 3 slots that are not our city residents, if we wanted to incorporate from Goleta.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. And then, so I'll just go to my comments now. Thank you for the clarifications, and just keep us posted on the FAA representative. I think that's a key step going forward. First, I want to thank our airport staff for the presentation today. There's a lot that we do at the airport. And Mr. Damore, I also want to thank you for your leadership over the past months out there, coming from not the background of aviation, but to step in to all these issues. They're very complex. There's a lot on each one of these, and they're different issues as well. They're not just related specifically to aviation. You've done a great job out there, and I've noticed at the Airport Commission meetings and the feedback that there is a different tone and a different collaborative, not just among staff, but among the public out there on these issues. So I just really appreciate how you've been able to bring people together on these issues and make some progress. And I think it's important because of where we're going with this is we are limited in what we can do. I think we heard that today. And we definitely, I understand, I think the council does, the impacts that are being experienced by the public. But to have someone like you who has shown a willingness and a commitment to try to address these issues goes a long way towards the trust that we're trying to build with the community to try to address these, even when we're limited, but we can still explore all avenues to try to achieve better outcomes. And so I just want to also stress that the City of Santa Barbara, we are committed to regional collaboration on issues. It's important because, not just at the airport, but in many different ways, because none of our cities and none of the unincorporated areas operate in a vacuum. And we see it on all kinds of things. I'll just give some examples of some of the areas in which we do regionally collaborate and we have much better results and we're able to look at things beyond our own borders. When we look at water management, that's a huge issue, and all of our jurisdictions are involved with that. Homeless response, another major issue that we're dealing with in government. Transportation, we're all members of SBCAG, but we have 101, what happens in Santa Barbara impacts what happens in Goleta and vice versa, and down the coast. Coastal planning efforts, we have the Beach Erosion Authority, which goes from Point Conception all the way down into actually Ventura and Oxnard, and we look at all these issues of coastal, beach access, and all these, and we have better solutions and we're able to understand the larger scope of the problem when we work together. And that's the way I view this, and I appreciate Mr. Imhoff, Mr. Kyriakos, and others, and the public coming forward from Goleta so we can understand those issues and try to resolve them to the best of our ability. In addition, we also have public safety is a regional effort. When we have responses to fires, we're in a direction now where it's not just going to be Santa Barbara responding to Santa Barbara. It's we go where it's ever needed and we true it up later, but that's the response we have, and it's one of the best systems in the world that we have the mutual aid. And with the airport, I view it the same way, is that we need to work together on this. So in terms of the noise abatement program, it has had some results. We heard that today. The RNAV, the FAA established the preferred approach, which has reduced some of the impacts, but we have a long ways to go in terms of what we could do. But I just want to highlight that the FAA did that, and that was because of the staff, and it was because of the public and having that data that we were able to do that. It didn't just happen. It took a lot of effort to do that, over multiple years, in fact, to get that. And we're going to continue to advocate for those approaches going forward, especially through the master planning process. That is a way for the public to be heard and to raise these issues, and having the new noise study that's going to be a part of that. I'd also like us, after we've heard directly from the FAA, or more engagement of what we can do through our legislative advocacy, both at the city and maybe collaboratively with Goleta and the county, because it does affect county residents as well in the unincorporated area there, to look at how we can collectively work to try to address some of these FAA regulations that limit our capacity to address this, whether it's looking at a 50 decibel, which would give us more mitigation opportunities versus the 65, those types of things. But again, if we're working together on the legislative advocacy instead of just each one individually, I think we'd have more of a collective impact. And there's ways to do that, which we can talk about offline, to try to work with that. And then the expansion, I would just say that I'm glad the clarification came today that the expansion that we approved earlier this year is in terms of the capacity that's already there. But I do think that as part of the master planning process and others, I do agree with Councilmember Sneddon and many of the members of the public today, that if there is expansion of flights in terms of hours or number of flights, that we do need to have a community input and let the community have information ahead of time, including our respective councils, our council and City of Goleta, in terms of what that would be and what alternatives are, before we get to a point where it gets expanded and we can't really do anything about it, because the flights used to be at different earlier times of the day, in the evening and later in the morning, but there have been changes in terms of FAA approaches that we heard about today, that the expansion to earlier 5 a.m. or earlier or later at night were limited. So just to have that conversation going into it eyes wide open and to have public input would be great. So, but with that, I just want to stress that do take the concern seriously of the public on the noise issues, and we're going to do our best to try to mitigate them. And this process coming up is a step to be engaged. And I also don't want to remiss in saying that the value of our airport it's undeniable that there is a huge value to all of us in having the airport and the access that it provides, not just for us to go to places, it was mentioned anywhere in North America with one flight, but it also allows our businesses to thrive here from all different sectors, as was mentioned by Ms. Janega Dykes, from our service sector to our tech sector to the educational. The alternative is for everyone to basically drive down to Los Angeles and have more cars on the highway going to LA, which has its own impacts out there as well. So it is a valuable asset to our community to have it, and we're very fortunate and to have the Santa Barbara Airport and the history that it provides. It's always evolving, and again, it is one of the oldest airports in the country, and it is one of the most historic in terms of the structures that it still has. So we're trying to grapple with the commercial future, but also at the same time the general aviation, which has long been a part of it as well, so which we touched on briefly today. So with that, I appreciate your presentation today and all the members of the public who spoke, and look forward to opportunities to try to work on these issues.
Ms. Sneddon.
Thank you, Mayor Rouse. So just final comments following up. I just want to be really clear. You were clear. I just want to be really, really clear that I don't want to increase passengers by 75%. I don't know if that's a wrong quote or not or what, but I just want to make it as clear as can be that if we're talking about physical reconfiguration of the space to allow for what's already in place, fine, but anything more than that, I really truly believe we're at capacity. As to the public comments and just responding to some of those, I do think it's imperative that we include Spanish translation for community meetings in Goleta, and that involve Goleta residents as well. Thank you for the question about if it would even be possible to have an FAA member present. I think that could be helpful on many fronts for the community. I'm agreeing that we could recommend a member for the unincorporated to sit on the airport commission. I think that is our recommendation, but I'm wary of making that a requirement. We have limitations in how we form these committees, and we can end up being underrepresented in different ways, and it takes away our flexibility. Plus, at different times, different issues become a hot button issue that we may need representation on, that we don't want to be locked into having, let's say we change the flight patterns and it never goes over Goleta in a certain way. We wouldn't want to be locked into having a member from a particular area. So from my perspective, having the flexibility, but honoring that we need the voice of Goleta community involved in that process. For the complaint monitoring, it has improved quite a bit. I think it could always have improvement on that too. For the noise study, I think it would be really informative to have data that includes spikes, not just average. I don't know, again, I have not fact checked on those comments on whether that's how it would be done or not done, but I'll just make my comment that having the spikes and having it included over peak season weekend or time, the maximums, the minimums, and what we're actually looking at with the averages as well, I think would be informative. Really, if there's any way to be limiting the nighttime flight hours or the earliest morning, middle of the night flight hours, I'm not sure what's changed there, how many of those flights are impacted. That was a public comment about times, but I really don't have the data on how many of those and how often that happens, but I think if we could limit them, it would be a good idea. And then really like these flight patterns to go out over the ocean. I think everybody would, and so whether it's that it's not published or not available to the pilots or whatever that is, that issue, in Santa Monica, the flight pattern and takeoff just goes out over the ocean and comes back and around and back, and pilots know that, everybody knows that, that's what you do. So I'm still sort of, I guess I'll just make the comment that keep moving this forward so that it's more the recommendation, if we could really get that going, that it's not flying over neighborhoods, and maybe even if, especially during the middle of the night and early morning. So maybe there's some way to be prioritizing those flight patterns at those particularly sensitive times of night. I just, my sense is that we could somehow be pressing for more on that. So I'd like to just make that my comment, that it's my hope that we do that. And on the bottom line, really wanting to balance the environmental impacts of the airport to wildlife, to the water quality, to air quality, to noise, which doesn't just impact neighbors, but also has a significant impact to wildlife as well. So I just will say it again, I think we're at capacity for the flights. That's my perspective. I think we should mitigate for what we do have. So whatever is happening in all those flights, that they go out over the ocean as much as possible, that they not be in the middle of the night as much as possible, or not repeating in the middle of the night as much as possible. I think we could be doing more for that in terms of mitigation. And especially because we're limited in what we can do. We've sort of gotten that message over and over that much of it isn't in our control. I think we have to be so careful about what expansion means, because what I'm sort of gathering from what happens is that if we expand and then we can't control it for some reason, can't say you can't fly in the middle of the night or what those hours are, which I'm not sure I'm completely on board with, then I definitely don't want to expand more if it's not in our control about things like that. So those are my comments, but overall, just really fantastic work at the airport and really responsive to listening to concerns. And I think we're on the right track of taking this all into account. I just want to be very careful how we use the term expansion and what we mean by it. Thank you.
All right, very good. Well, this is not an action item, so thank you very much for your work and presentation. And we will move on to Council and Staff Communications Committee assignment reports. Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just bring up my notes real quick here. I was given a tour of Hillside House by the CEO. And they really do provide an amazing service for the community. I had no idea all that is hidden back there, and looking forward to the expansion that they're planning in the near future. Attended the SB Act meeting on homelessness, where Jeff Schaefer just went over him leaving SB Act and being replaced by Catherine Soto Vasquez. So that's going to be a new change to that organization. Attended the celebration of the Ukrainian Independence Day in front of the Art Museum. Doss Williams was there and spoke, and I spoke on behalf of the city. Attended the Contemporary Arts Museum's Emerging Artists exhibition. It was really well attended. We're really going to miss that space once it's gone. Attended the Communify board meeting where we all went over a variety of services that the organization's doing. Let's see. Attended the downtown safety meeting with PD and business owners. Went over recent acts of violence in the downtown area and what the PD is doing to address it. The Fire and Police Commission meeting discussed Oversight Review Board and SB Act, gave a presentation about their strategic plan on addressing the homelessness crisis. And let's see. I attended the Access Advisory Committee. They discussed updates to the city website, and Public Works presented updates that they have done to better serve the disabled community. They had some suggestions for us that I'll share with Rebecca later. Councilmember Friedman and I attended the homeless activist luncheon at Trinity Episcopal Church, and the county and the city both gave presentations about their efforts to address the homelessness crisis. Went to the Rosewood Miramar and was a judge for the dog show on Dog Appreciation Day, which was really fun. Let's see. Participated in the Bonet Park neighborhood cleanup. Big thanks to Hillary Allen from city staff for putting that together. And attended the Connect California event at the Santa Barbara City College Wake campus, where they were able to help residents get their internet bill partially paid for. And then also attended the Pacific Pride Festival at Chest Palm Park Beach with several fellow elected colleagues, and that was a great turnout and great to see so many allies come out and participate. And that's me.
All right, Ms. Sneddon.
I just have to say, wow, Councilmember Gutierrez. That was so inspiring. I'll say that, inspiring. So I participated in a community meeting with CAUSE on tenant protections, met with representative from MIG for State Street Master Planning, which I think many of you did on the week before. And City College is back in session, so it's a vibrant new start.
Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Attended the homeless activist luncheon that Councilmember Gutierrez referenced, and the presentations there was from Barbara Anderson on the Community Formation Commission, and then as well as presentations from the county and the city on the housing element update process. Did a virtual meeting with the residents of Valverde Retirement Community, and we just talked about a lot of different issues that they were interested in, and just an overview of the city. So it was great to be able to connect with them again, and hopefully we'll be in person next time, but Zoom works for now. Also attended the Chamber of Commerce held their a mixer down in Carpinteria, so I was able to attend that down in Carpinteria. And then also attended the Pride Festival. Wasn't able to make it in the early, but I attended it later in the day with my family. Had to work my other job in the morning, but it was great to see so many people out and just celebrating. And it was very well attended from the public. And then also the Coastal Commission Sea Level Rise monthly working group meeting. We had that again this past week.
All right, very good. And with that, we stand adjourned.